I don't like doing my own home repairs, and when I made some videos that honestly show how much I don't like it, they seem to help a lot of other guys like me. So I thought it would be good to make this new set of videos. Guys like me have a million questions for the progressive activists that we see on the news, but nobody on TV ever asks those questions. On CNN, the host probably agrees with the activists, so his questions are weak. And on Fox News, the host just tries to make them look bad. Either way, nobody's asking the questions that might actually help us get a feel for where they're coming from, so we might actually understand them a little better. It's no surprise that people who disagree over politics are so angry at each other nowadays. So right before Christmas, me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove around the West and did our own interviews. We drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes to ask those questions that are never asked. We're not trying to change their mind or make them look bad. We just want to understand where they're coming from. These folks were brave, considering what can happen nowadays if you say one wrong thing on YouTube. And we talked about a lot of really sensitive subjects, so just leave right now if these conversations might offend you. If you stay, though, I think you'll hear some things you've never heard before and have a better understanding of your fellow Americans. I did. We next met in Las Cruces, New Mexico with Anna Juarez, an activist. How do you feel about illegal immigration versus legal immigration and the kind of quantities involved nowadays?
Well, the nature of our society nowadays requires there be some rules. But you have to understand throughout history, people's moved. You know, there were always, and we're not talking just invasions and wars, but just migrations. Human race works that way. If you look at North and South America, the Native Americans, yes, they had territories, but they were a lot more fluid than our current borders. New Mexico, where I live, was part of Mexico. We became a state in 1912. We have people here whose ancestors moved here, 200, So to say that because someone by chance was born on the wrong side of the border, that we have the right to dictate they can't come at all or create artificial boundaries that aren't practical. I personally think the wall is, a poor idea for managing it. But society nowadays does require some sort of rules. We have census. We have an overpowering need to protect our self-interest. And that's the thing. Trump became very popular because of the fear factor. People afraid that someone was going to come steal their job. When fact is, I wouldn't want to be in a field picking onions. You wouldn't want to be in a field picking onions. If these folks want to come pick onions because it's a better life than when they were, let's figure out a way for them to legally come. And my position is, if you really want to stop them from coming, you start throwing their employers in jail. If there are no jobs here, they have no incentive to come. But American greed is such that they will hire these people because they know there's no consequences to the American. The bad guy is not the poor guy who's coming over here and getting paid pennies. It's the employer who's taking advantage of those people, and there has to be consequences to them. I'm pro-union because of that. If projects require that you use union workers, and then the union is managing, so it's Americans or people who are here legally, then it solves the problem. But again, it's the employers that don't want unions because they don't care who they take advantage of as long as they get their fat profits.
So I think we're in agreement then that it's the fact that we're not enforcing these laws that's the problem. So how much do you think is too much, and have we gotten to that point yet?
There will always be jobs that those of us that were born here who have that certain sense of privilege will not do. I don't want to work in a nursing home wiping someone's rear, okay? But yet, we're an aging society. My mother's in a nursing home. 20 years from now, if I'm still around, I'll be in a nursing home. So bringing people in for certain unskilled jobs, but giving them a livable wage. And again, if they don't have their paperwork in order, then it's the employer who gets punished. Because if our employers knew that there were going to be actual sanctions, that there were going to be consequences, here along the border, there are so many people who hire folks that they knew or should have known were undocumented workers. But they take advantage of those people's desperation and need. And that's so un-Christian, it's just scary.
Okay, so if you have folks that are simply sick of, I guess, the competition with folks that are not from this country originally, okay, how would you answer their concerns? Because we've talked a lot and we hear a lot about in the press the concern for the people who are, who are coming from third world countries. We've mentioned it a couple of times already.
And we clearly need certain people from other countries. We have a doctor shortage. We have a nurse shortage. As I had said, we need CNAs to be in nursing homes. There are certain jobs that we do need to import the work. I mean, even Mr. Trump has brought in workers and petitioned to bring in workers from other countries to work at some of his establishments. So, my good Lord, he's the one saying we need to keep them out. And yet, when it's to his benefit, he wants to import them. So we will always need some workers from elsewhere. That's the thing is, we should set up programs where they get to come, where we get to vet them, where it's for jobs that are available and not being filled by our people. But that's where the fight comes, because there are many employers who could hire an American, but economics and their own greed, they're going to hire foreign workers simply because the foreign worker is going to expect less. They're not going to expect insurance. They're not going to expect paid leave. They're going to be willing to come in on holidays without getting overtime. And Americans know their rights. These poor folks that are coming here because they're hungry and their kids are hungry, they don't know those rights. And second of all, they'd be afraid to try to enforce them. I worked at one time at legal aid here. We worked with low-income people. And some of these folks, because they were not here legally, because they were not documented workers, lived in rat holes that you and I would never live in. I wouldn't let my dogs live there. But because they didn't want to complain because the landlord might turn them into immigration, they just sucked it up. Again, another tier of our society taking advantage of people who are desperate.
And we agree that it's the employers who employ them that bring the magnet. They're a huge part of the problem. Right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I guess, what would you say to the Trump supporter who is saying, okay, that is direct competition with me, and it's because I am also low-skilled, and I will vote for Trump because he, as far as I see, is the only person who is keeping that in mind.
Well, I would say that other politicians are thinking that in mind, and that if you really analyze Trump's solutions, the wall is not practical. Anyone who lives along the border knows that. Years ago, one of my high school friends came to visit, and I took her down to El Paso. While we were there getting ready to cross the bridge, there was somebody with a little canoe coming across illegally. That's in downtown El Paso. If you've ever driven the old highway from Deming, New Mexico to El Paso, you know there are vast stretches where it's nothing but dirt. And there might be a fence, some sort of attempt, and it's real easy to put a ladder up against the fence, to dig a hole under a fence.
You're telling me that a wall just won't work.
No, it won't, because of the people who are here undocumented. And I do know people that are here or have been here undocumented. Many of them came over on student visa or vacation, etc., and just overstayed. Some of them have never been asked to prove their documentation that they're American simply because they're very white. They're blonde, they're blue-eyed. My uncle, and we're talking, this is years ago, used to come to the United States from Mexico, and he would be able to cross and work, and he was blonde and blue-eyed, so he was never questioned. He would work in factories up in the Chicago area where immigration would come and take all the brown workers, and he would just lean against a wall, smoke a cigarette, and nobody would even ask him what his nationality was.
But do you understand, the folks on my side of the thing we're flabbergasted that that happens, that enforcement is so silly as to simply look at skin color, because that's an oversimplification. So, from my point of view, that's a straw man argument. My question to you was, why do you say, on what basis do you say that a wall will not work?
Because, first of all, the length of our border Okay.
It's only about, I mean, we've spent much more than the biggest estimate is $50 billion. $50 billion is a drop in the bucket to us.
I don't think people are factoring in all the costs that are really there, and they're saying we'll build it for $50 billion, but I don't think they do. Plus, people are coming in through the Canadian border, but somehow that's okay because they're white. There are people coming on cruise ships and just staying or whatever. There's the number of people actually walking across the desert and coming in that could be slowed down by a wall is just a fraction of the people that are getting over here. Look at the First Lady. She came over and she was doing modeling when she wasn't she wasn't supposed to be working. It wasn't a work visa when she came over. Oh, but she's really white, so they let her get away with it.
Okay. So, well, I don't have an answer to that because I don't know what the specific charge is. You're saying that people will, simply based on skin color, they'll grant exceptions, which I think everyone can agree is an idiotic way to do law enforcement.
It's wrong. And the enforcement thing is a big problem. I think if we had good enforcement, we wouldn't need to build the wall and we wouldn't be impacting wildlife. And that already people who are doing the drug thing know how to get around every barrier we put up. And boats coming up. He cuts the funding to Coast Guard, but coming over by boats, both drugs and illegals do that.
Okay, so when we see Trump come out and say, I think there's a problem with immigration, I think I'll do something about it. What exactly is the problem with the Trump approach as you see it right now?
He seeks to divide our nation. He wants us to be fighting against each other, and a president should unify the nation.
Okay, but what evidence do you have that he's trying to divide people? I watch his speeches and I say he's addressing an issue that, I mean, you and I can both agree that the immigration is a problem, and
yes,
that there is a problem here. How do you take that and say that he's dividing the nation when he points out a problem we both agree on?
He honored the Navajo code talkers by having them in front of a picture of Andrew Jackson and making fun of Elizabeth Warren. That's the behavior of a fourth grade bully, not an intelligent, reasoned man.
Well, you could argue that too, but if we start talking about that, I agree.
Do you think he did the right thing by using the word Pocahontas, by criticizing Elizabeth Warren, by having Andrew Jackson's portrait behind them? Do you think that was wise? Do you think that was a mature reaction?
Well, no, I don't think it was wise, but I am glad that he's promoting policies that I like. So the thing is, Lyndon Johnson, if you recall, he was every bit as crude as Trump, but he did things in a way that progressives really enjoyed. I mean, he created the Great Society programs. So he's like our Lyndon Johnson. He's a guy that is getting things done in a way that we like, although we kind of wish he would do a better job going about it.
I don't think he's getting things done. Okay. See, that's where we disagree. He has not really pushed for any legislation. He pushes for legislation that hurts people, and he hasn't, unifying. Now, Edward Kennedy may have had his faults, and we all know what they were. But that man knew how to talk to both sides of the table and bring them towards the middle, and we need another Ted Kennedy right now.
Okay.
And as for Lyndon Johnson being just like Trump, oh, Lord, no. He was crude, he was rude, he was a Texan. But I would take Lyndon Johnson any day over Donald Trump.
So ends this interview in our Drive to Understand series. I've never understood why the mainstream media seldom interview Latino Americans like Anna Juarez, whose families have been here for many generations. And she describes specifics about folks who come here to work that I think are important to understand about our border situation. It makes you wonder why the mainstream media rarely talk to folks like her. I hope you agree and may want to support this series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.